Shalom lekulam. I am Yair, and welcome back to Chain Languages. We talk about Indo-European languages a lot on this channel, mostly living ones from different branches such as Slavic, Germanic, Romance, Hellenic, and Indo-Iranian languages. However, many people don't realize that there were other branches of the Indo-European language family which died out in antiquity, usually at the hands of the Romans, as always, though this is not always the case. In many places across the world, Indo-European languages were once spoken in areas where now either a different Indo-European language is spoken or a completely non-Indo-European language took the stage. So today we'll be discussing 3 Indo-European branches that didn't make the cut. Yalla, bo natkhil. The first language/branch we're going to talk about is in an area still dominated by Indo-European languages today, yet vastly different ones. This language is Illyrian, spoken in the area known as Illyria in Roman times before they split into different administrative provinces. Though the background photo shows Croatia, it is believed that the language was mainly concentrated in modern-day Crna Gora, Herzegovina, and northern Albania, and as the map showed before, Dalmatia, Macedonia, and a few more areas also had Illyrian influence. Also, before anyone gets too disappointed, I have to inform you that, sadly, there will be no flags shown in this video, as all these languages are far too ancient and had no forms of flags or heraldry during the times they existed. Our evidence of Illyrian comes mainly from toponyms and personal names. Sadly, the language is poorly attested, and only a few words and names are known. However, it is enough to ascertain that the language was indeed Indo-European. Illyrian was probably related to Masapic, another Indo-European language that is still unclassified in relation to where it sits in the family, yet it was spoken in southern Italia in the Puglia region. Many Albanians in the comments will likely try to convince everyone that Albanian is the descendant of the Illyrian language and civilization, and there might indeed be a link there. Yet it is too difficult to prove with such a lack of texts. Despite the Albanian theories, they ultimately are related, but it is more likely to be a distant relation going back to Proto-Indo-European. Surprisingly, for the lack of text, the latest possible date for Illyrian's extinction is around the 6th century CE, even though it would have been under centuries of Roman rule by this point. From the small vocabulary we do have, there is evidence of Illyrian having come into contact with both Celtic languages and with ancient Greek. Some Illyrian names made their way into Greek, likely from Illyrians who emigrated there and assimilated. Sadly, I have no sample text for Illyrian, however I will link the article for proposed Illyrian vocabulary. I didn't want to show it here because it's a messy list of words and reconstructions that would be difficult to read on this video anyway. With that, we will move to our next Indo-European branch. Despite the people being known for being fierce warriors, the next Indo-European branch that didn't make it to the modern day is Thracian, or with the correct Latin pronunciation, Thracian, which I'll be using. Thracia is an area that covers 3 different countries today, and was incredibly important historically. And this map shows the extent to which the language was spoken according to Ivan Doridanov. Note that Turkish still refers to European Turkey as Thracia, being closer in the original pronunciation than the English name. However, let's get started. Thracian is slightly better attested than Illyrian, yet most sources are still second-hand. It is also important to note that Thracian acted more like a full branch of Indo-European, having several different Thracian languages, yet some theorize they might have just been dialects of one another. According to the Pilgrim of Piacenza, a 6th century CE Christian pilgrim who wrote about his travels in 570 CE, a monastery in the Sinai Peninsula contained monks who spoke Greek, Coptic, Aramaic, and Bessian, which is a known dialect of Thracian, or possibly language, named after one of the Thracian tribes. This is the latest attestation of the language, however. One really surprising thing I discovered when reading about Thracian is that it is a Satem language, which is unusual for the Indo-European languages of Europe. This has led many linguists to draw an obvious link with the Baltic branch, the only other Indo-European languages that are Satem. For those that don't know, this references the Kentum-Satem split, which usually separates the Indo-European languages from east to west. The Western languages retaining the hard k, where the Eastern languages palatalize to s. Ironically enough, the Latin word centum did palatalize to either centum or centum, depending on the modern language. One final thing to note about Thracian before we look at some examples is that it influenced some place names still used today. The best example for this is the city of Plovdiv in Bulgaria, which comes from Thracian. The Greek name that was officially used in the Roman Empire was Philippopolis. However, by the time the Slavs migrated into the region, they appeared to preserve the local Thracian name Pulpodeva, which was a direct translation of the Greek name into Thracian, as the word deva or dava means city in Thracian. The fact that the Slavs adopted the Thracian name and not the Greek name could indicate that Thracian was still being spoken by the locals in the time of the Slavic migrations, which could put the date of its extinction even further. Now moving on to some samples. We first have a ring with the inscription in the Greek alphabet, as shown with the translation below. There is a second inscription which I could find too, also from another ring, with the transcription shown here. Linguists have theorized that Mezanai means horsemen, and actually appears to be cognate with a similar Illyrian word, menzanas. However, that's all I have for Thracian. Now let's move on to the final language of today. Finally, we have a long dead language and civilization, yet they left their presence. This language was Frisian, and the people are probably most well known today for the Frisian cap, a classic symbol of democracy that survives today in flags and coats of arms. Frisia was located roughly in this area, with the Frisian kingdom at its height roughly corresponding to these borders. Here is also a useful map which shows where each Frisian inscription has been found. As you can see, it separates the language into different stages. Now, Frisian has had a pretty close history with ancient Greek. It was heavily influenced by Greek in both Middle and New Frisian, where it was written in the Greek alphabet. Although Frisian did use its own alphabet in the times of Old Frisian, it was virtually identical to the Proto-Greek script. Frisian would eventually be absorbed by Greek during the Hellenization of Anatolia. Many linguists have proposed the idea of a Graeco-Phrygian branch because of how close they are in features. Yet there is also a lot of overlap with Thracian and Armenian, so for now, Frisian enjoys a status as its own branch of the Indo-European languages. Bear in mind that all the branches I have talked about today are also proposed to be one larger group, along with Greek, Dacian and Albanian, to form the Balkan branch of the Indo-European languages. Something else I also found interesting is that Plato mentioned in ancient times that he noticed many similarities between Greek and Frisian. However, Frisian and Greek were not the same, and Greek would cause Frisian to die. It is unclear when this happened. People in isolated communities were still speaking Frisian by the time the Romans conquered Anatolia. Before this had happened, the Galatians had actually devastated a large portion of the Frisians, along with Alexander the Great before them. So Frisian was effectively on its last legs by the time the Romans came along. Despite this, the Romans kind of just left them alone for once, and there is mention from the 5th century CE of people speaking Frisian. This is the last known mention, however, and it is very likely that the language had gone completely extinct by the 7th century at the latest. Unlike the previous two languages we've discussed, Frisian had a long written history, and Old Frisian, Middle Frisian and New Frisian are very different stages of the language. Surprisingly enough, most surviving Frisian documents are in Old Frisian, as many New Frisian texts are thought to have been written on papyrus, and thus wouldn't survive as well as stone inscriptions. It is said the difference between Old and New Frisian is greater than ancient and modern Greek. Before we proceed, Wikipedia actually has a consonant inventory listed for Frisian, as shown here. Now, let's look at some samples. Here is an Old Frisian inscription with the translation below. And if you're wondering, yes, that is the Midas or Midas from the Greek myth, or at least we think it is. The Greek myth of King Midas is indeed about a legendary king of Phrygia, not Greece. And we don't know that there was a King Midas, the same from this inscription, yet it is unclear if the real Midas and the myth Midas are referencing the same King Midas. Similarly, we have another old Phrygian inscription here. Tyana was a major city in the Phrygian kingdom, and this inscription perfectly displays the old Phrygian alphabet, with the translation here, of course. Finally, we have two Middle Frisian inscriptions from around the time of Alexander the Great and his conquest in 334 BCE, and are both examples of Frisian poetry on funerary tombstones. This time you can see the inscriptions are completely written in the Greek script. I find it interesting that the first sample of poetry references Zeus, a famous Greek god, yet the second sample references Bas, who is thought to be the Frisian fertility god. I think this perfectly displays the huge influence that Greek language and culture had entered Frisian society, and of course language. So you can see a mix between Zeus and Bas. Anyway, that's all for Frisian, so now let's conclude this video. I hope everyone learned something new and fascinating. I cannot help but think if history had gone differently, and modern Illyrian, Thracian and Phrygian languages were still spoken, all with their own distinct cultures and nation states. Let me know if you enjoyed this style of video, and next time we could discuss more Indo-European languages/branches that never made the cut. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Litraut.